Good morning, everyone. We'll start the webinar in a few minutes. Just waiting for people to connect themselves. I suggest that we wait for another up to 1 minute, and then we can effectively start the webinar. While waiting for people to get connected, I'm first sharing with you some technical information for this webinar. So it will be recorded and also be online on the ESPD social media channels on Facebook mainly. The recording of the webinar will also be made available on the Helpdesk website. I'll say a few words about this. For the question, especially to participants, you can use the Q&A options, and you can also share your comments in the chat box. And also quite important, this webinar will have interpretation in French and Spanish. English will be the main language of the webinar, and I believe you have all the instructions to activate the interpretation in the different button controls of Zoom. And if you have any technical issues, feel free to share it in the chat box, and we'll try to help you out. Okay, great. But I propose that we start. I will stop sharing my screen with the technical information and properly welcome everyone to this webinar on social services, opportunities, needs, and challenges in accessing EU funds. My name is Mathieu de Porter. I'm the president of the European Council of Associations of General Interest, CEDAG, that is a partner of this project. About the webinar, it's a webinar organized as part of the Social Services Helpdesk on EU funds that is co-funded by the European Commission. We'll say a few words later on about this project, but basically it's a pilot project that aims to finance the building blocks for social services helpdesk to support social services in both accessing and using EU funds. It also aims to help managing authorities in using EU funds to finance quality interventions in the field of social services. We won't be able to talk about the quite wide scope of this project today, and we will actually mainly focus on the and also assess the different opportunities, needs, and assessment and challenges, faced by European social services in accessing EU funds. And when we talk about EU funds, we mainly talk about European social funds and ERDF being the European Regional and Development Funds. Regarding the agenda of our webinar, we have some key speakers. First, we'll have Fabiana Scarano from EASPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities, that will give us a presentation of the project, of the Helpdesk project. Then we will have both Margot Renard and Eleni Kefalinou to present the assessment work that had been undertook as part of the project. Of course, in the meantime, you will have the opportunity, and that's quite important, as participants to submit your questions and comments in the chat box. I think it's also worth mentioning that the main objective of this webinar is mainly to share and update based on all the information that we gathered so far. Share with you as practitioners, as national policymakers, all of these results. Also to discuss the different findings that will be presented. So we have the chance to have a panel with representatives of the European Commission, of Managing Authority in Sweden, and of a social service provider in Spain. Again, we'll have a Q&A session right after the panel, if you would like to add any questions or comments. And we will then close the webinar with some closing remarks by Laura Jones from the European Platform of Rehabilitation. Without further transition, I invite Fabiana to share a presentation to provide us some oversight on what's the Helpdesk project. Fabiana, you have 5 to 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share now my screen to briefly present you the project. I hope you can see it. So the Helpdesk is a 2-year project.
Fabiana,
sorry?
Can you maybe put it in a full
Yes,
screen?
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, voila. So the Helpdesk is a 2-year project that is funded by the European Commission, and the kickoff in May 2022 and will run until April 2024. The project is run by a consortium that is made up of 16 partners. We have both European network and national organization that represent all kinds of social services, as well as public authorities responsible for social services. So in a nutshell, what is the project aim and how we aim to achieve it? So the project mainly aims to increase and facilitate the use of EU funds by social services. And this will be done by, as Matthew mentioned before, launching the building blocks of the first European Helpdesk for social services. The Helpdesk will have mainly 2 priorities. On one side, supporting social services in more easily access and better use EU funds, in particular the European Social Fund Plus and the European Regional Development Fund. And on the other side, supporting managing authorities in using these funds to support and to finance quality intervention in the fields of social services. But why this project is so important and why do we need it? We know that in Europe, the need for care and support is constantly increasing. And of course, social services can play a crucial role in providing this kind of support. However, nowadays, they have to face many challenges. Examples are issue of chronic underfunding or staff shortages, also difficulties in transitioning to community-based and person-centered form of services. Of course, receiving adequate funding is key to overcome these challenges and therefore foster social inclusion. However, what is the situation in Europe? In Europe, we see that there are funds available to support social services, but there are many barriers that prevent the use of these funds in this regard. And these barriers are felt both on the side of social service providers that, for example, very often don't know how to find the right calls, how to build a partnership, how to develop a project application. And at the same time, on the side of managing authorities that frequently don't know how to use these funds in a way that can be relevant for social services. So the Helpdesk will basically try to tackle these challenges both on the side of service providers and on the one of managing authorities. How we aim to do this, the project foreseen, of course, different phases. I'm briefly going to present you the main one. So the first one, on which we are also focusing this webinar, was evidence gathering. And we try in this phase to get a better insight into the main barriers and the challenges that social services and managing authorities face when it comes to accessing and using ESF Plus and ERDF. And to do this, we launched 2 surveys, one for service providers and one for managing authorities. We also organize national events in 10 different countries to collect information from the ground. And also we did a mapping exercise to collect as much information as possible about how funds are structured and managed in all the European member states. Then we moved to the second phase, knowledge sharing. So based on the information that we collected in phase 1, we are now trying to sharing the knowledge and build the capacity of social services in accessing funds. And in this phase, we are producing several deliverables. Among them, the Helpdesk website that will be the central point of all the information collected and all the tools that we will create within the framework of the project. I will also share with you in the chat the link to have access to the website later on. On the website, we also have the real online Helpdesk service. So there is this web form that user can fill out if they have specific question around EU funds. And the Helpdesk consortium is trying to reply to this question, or at least to guide us seeking support in the right direction. And currently we are also developing a training program for social services on how to access EU funds. And this training will be transformed into a massive open online course, so any learning that will be freely accessible on the Helpdesk website. The other 2 phases are facilitation. So since EU funds are quite bureaucratic, we will try to create a toolkit aimed at simplifying and facilitating the use of ESF Plus and ERDF for social services projects. And lastly, policy guidance. In this phase, we are trying to make a recommendation on what kind of project should be funded. So the result will be this technical guidance on effective intervention in social services that will aim at advising both managing authorities and social services on how to maximize the impact of EU funds in social services interventions. So at the end of the project, what we hope to achieve, of course, to have produced our 30 deliverables that are foreseen, to have achieved our main goal, so to have made EU funds better accessible for social services. And lastly, to have set up a plan that will allow us to transform the project into a longer-term Helpdesk. So thank you for your attention. I just want to highlight that here you can see the email addresses of me, myself, and also my colleague, Lili Talink and Thomas Bignall. They are coordinating the project with me. So if you have any question, do not hesitate to reach out to us later on. And now,
thank you very much, Fabiana. Thank you also for the perfect timing, well respected. Again, also, if you have any questions about the project itself, different stages, please also do not hesitate to submit your question in the chat box. Now that we have a better understanding on what's the context of this project, we can actually start with the core topic of our webinar. That is, the main question is, what are the issues at stake for different categories of actors involved in accessing and delivering EU funds? Of course, I'm talking about social service providers, managing authorities, but also intermediate bodies. Again, the objective of this webinar is really to inform you about what we actually found out as part of the gathering, evidence gathering process that we undertook, but also to confront you with these findings, you as national practitioners and policymakers at the national level. So indeed, the first step of this project was to objectify and analyze the many issues that are faced by these different actors. I will start with the first slides of the PowerPoint. I'm asking Margot to please share the PowerPoint. To start with the second slide about what we actually aim to do as part of this evidence gathering process. There are already some, if you can come back, just to recall, I mean, that was already mentioned by Fabiana, but there are 3 sets of activities that were done. The first one was about compiling the existing knowledge about EU funds and make it more actually accessible to everyone, meaning making sure that it can be well understood and easily understood. And on this, and we will share in the chat box the link to the Helpdesk website. You actually have a dedicated section on more general information about EU funds at the European level, but we also have some insightful information about how EU funds are being structured, what are the different priorities, and so on in the 27 member states. Second set of activities, European surveys that have been addressed to both managing authorities and intermediate bodies, and of course, social services to assess the needs, opportunities, and challenges. And finally, 10 national evidence gathering fora to go a bit further and grasp the qualitative inputs on the needs and practices at the national level. Just a few words regarding the methodology and scope of the surveys. So 2 online surveys towards both social services and managing authorities and intermediate bodies at the national level. Surveys have been disseminated throughout the EU, also be made available in 21 EU languages, and disseminated through the different national or regional membership of the consortium partners. Between September and November, we were able to reach out more than 3,000 contacts. And eventually we gathered inputs from nearly 380 social services providers in 27 countries, and nearly 80 inputs from managing authorities in 23 countries. Of course, we cannot say that it's a representative sample, clearly not, but I think we can be fairly happy about the response rate. Sorry, that is quite good. Well, without further transition, I hand it over to Margot to provide us some insight content out of these surveys. Margot, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you, Mathieu, for the introduction. Now I'm going to present you the main takeaways from the service provider survey. So here is the main trends, European trends. It's not about the national trends. So we try to have general conclusions about what has been pointed out by these social service providers. So we divided the main takeaways in 3 categories. Here I'm going to start about what is being told about the design of calls for EU funds. So first of all, we can say that 60% of the social service providers consider that EU priorities are in line with what service providers need, except for some activities such as social work and aftercare activities. Also for the majority, so for 70% of the service providers, they think that project calls are well formulated, despite some usual jargon. They also highlighted some main barriers to project submission, such as the co-funding capacity, the short deadlines, the eligibility criteria that are sometimes a bit hard to respect, and also the lack of guidance and support from managing authorities and leading organizations. And finally, they say that there is a big challenge about the sustainability of projects, because sometimes the national funding are not really aligned with the EU priorities. The second part, okay, here we go. The second category is about the project submission. So we divide it into internal challenges and external challenges. For the internal ones, they say that staff capacities and skills is a bit an issue sometimes, because they lack financial resources to upskill the staff. And about the external issues, it's more about the administrative part, which sometimes is complicated, such as the forms that are very complicated to complete, but also the regulation of public procurement and the state aid. And finally, about the project implementation, often there is a changing rules during the project implementation. They talked about the refining and adding requirements and the change of public requirement rules. It happens sometimes. And finally, there are some specific issues in the reporting phases, such as the complexity in the administrative and financial reporting, but also issues in framing activities, in unrealistic indicators, such as I said before, the lack of feedbacks from managing authorities. This has been very pointed out. I mean, the collaboration between managing authorities and social services providers that sometimes is a bit complicated. And finally, the processing delays and audits occurring sometimes a few years after the end of the project. So this was the main takeaways from social services providers. Now I'm going to present you the main takeaways for the managing authorities and the intermediate bodies. As I said before, I'm going to divide it into different categories. Here is the relevance of operational programs for social services. So a majority of managing authorities consider that social providers are quite active in using EU funds, and that these funds are efficiently allocated to social providers. The majority challenges that face the managing authorities are, for example, defining applicant rules, setting priorities, and allocating funds. Most of the national ESF Plus and ERDF managing bodies carry out the implementation of the operational program without involvement of external experts, as they claim that it's the most appropriate way to carry out their responsibility. Managing authorities pointed out some leverage that are important to help social services to help them overcome challenges in accessing and using EU funding. They say that they need more information, knowledge. They should, managing authorities should share more information, but also involve the relevant public bodies as intermediaries or in advisory capacity. And finally, among available simplification, the simplified cost option were the most preferred, followed by the usage of IT monitoring tools and platforms. So for the last part, it's about the capacity of social services to mobilize EU funds. So here again is the opinion of managing authorities. Most managing authorities consider that social providers have the capacity to submit and implement project proposals, and they consider that human resources is the most important internal factor to guarantee the success of social services implementing the project financed by EU funding. They highlighted internal factors that contribute to successful project implementation. So they talked about the staff skills, as I said earlier, and the experience, the dedicated staff. Sometimes there is not enough staff dedicated to a project, and the financial capacity, of course. And the main issues in project application and management are administration issues, budget and funding issues, complexity of procedures, and lack of knowledge and experience. So here are the main takeaways from both surveys that had been spread all over Europe. Now I'm gonna let the floor to Mathieu to introduce the National Gathering Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margot. Indeed, just to a quick transition before giving the floor to Eleni and talk to you about the second set of activity, again, to talk about the national evidence process that we undertook. To tell you that complementary to the surveys that have been submitted online, we had the opportunity to organize events in 10 different countries. These events were really the opportunity to have first more qualitative inputs from the national stakeholders. And I'm talking here about both public and private social services, but of course the regional and national managing authorities and intermediate bodies. That was also the opportunity for these actors at the national level to have some time to exchange about their own reality and the issues they face from their own perspective. I've said enough. We'll then now invite Eleni to take the floor and share her presentation. And we are perfectly on time, so you can really take whatever time you need, Eleni. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to introduce and present all the interesting qualitative data that we've collected through this 10 national evidence gathering forum. I'm going to share now my presentation with you. Just let me know only if you can see. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So we are talking about this 10 national fora in 10 countries. So I wanted just to give a little bit of an overview which countries were these 10 that we hold the events at. So we have Sweden, we have Belgium, Czech Republic, Spain, Italy, Greece, Ireland, Austria, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. As you nicely put before, also these national evidence gathering fora, they were complementary to the survey. So you will see while I'm going to present to you the information that we've gathered that they are very much interrelated with what Margot earlier presented. Starting with the main outcomes regarding the obstacles and challenges, we've tried to gather all the information for managing authorities and social services. So I'm going to give a general overview here. Some of the challenges and obstacles we found out to be are mainly, and to start with, knowledge gaps. So mainly for social service providers, there is the notion that they don't know where to find information about EU funding or where to start with searching about how to access EU funding, etc. We found out that also regulations are a big part of that is challenging for them as well. And as again, as mentioned before by Margot, communication between them sometimes is a little bit difficult or challenging at times. We found also that language barriers were sometimes obstacle to accessing EU funding. This is a little bit twofold in a way that sometimes it refers also to the jargon that is used. So it's a little bit difficult, the terminology is a little bit difficult to be understood by social service providers, but also English sometimes. So we've seen that it's difficult to find staff. There's a shortage of staff that actually speaks also English in order to cope with EU funding, that is the main language, let's say in English. Then we've seen also that there is a mismatch of calls and real needs. So this bottom-up approach of real needs from local up to EU level is difficult to bring up the needs bottom up, and also the needs that are augmented the last few years, and they keep increasing due to different crises that also change the needs for social services provision. Then we've seen also, as I said, the gap between regional, national, local needs also and EU priorities. And then low-level participation of social service providers in operational programs. This is also something that was expressed. So they are not participating sometimes actively. So the design, also on the design for calls, hence sometimes this actually contributes to the mismatch of the calls and the real needs. There is also the midterm appraisals that actually came in light that actually do not feed back into the design and implementation, and there is a change of priorities during an operational program within these 7 years, which sometimes it's a little bit confusing. Another challenge is the low access of NGOs and the third sector in our funding, also that was something expressed during these events. Also an interest for longer term interventions. So they have actually underlined that most of the interventions were short term, while sometimes social services sector needs, of course, some longer term interventions and projects that can ensure sustainability also of actions after the closure of projects. And also limited complementarity among EU funds. Here, regarding obstacles and challenges, I've tried to kind of separate it into the phases of projects. So what they have identified as challenging during, for example, the initiation phase. There again, we find the complexity of EU funding. We have administration processes that are very difficult to be understood or very difficult to cope. And as earlier again mentioned, partnerships, it's difficult for them to establish partnerships or to find other to create, yes, partnerships, because there is not a specific way determined that can help them. Also, financial barriers are something very much expressed more than once regarding the percentage of co-funding. Of course, this changes in every country, but in general, it's something that more or less was expressed throughout all the 10 countries. And also reimbursement gap. So when sometimes it takes time for a claim to be reimbursed or processed, so this can create some financial difficulties for social service providers. And finally, it has been mentioned also a lack of strategy and vision. That is very interesting. To move on, also during the implementation phase, we've seen that, again, a knowledge gap, there is a knowledge gap in procurement procedures. In general, also procurement procedures is something very much mentioned, and legal framework around their funding. And lack of workforce, again, as Margot mentioned earlier, this came to complement the notion that it's missing skilled staff, it's missing people with the skills to actually implement projects, and there is also a high turnover that also can affect during the projects. To move on, we see again administrative workload. Here we talk also from pre-implementation and post-implementation. The mention of unrealistic timelines in the management of projects. The monitoring phase also, and the monitoring of the use of funds and implementation, so measurable KPIs, which has also been mentioned as very difficult to define, especially in the social services sector, in a qualitative way as well. Different management patterns of managing authorities on intermediate bodies sometimes can create also legal uncertainty, especially afterwards when there is an auditing requirements or an audit control. And sometimes this was also difficult for social service providers to face. And lack of support and training systems in order to encourage partnerships or give advice or consultations during the implementation phase. Just to mention that these are also outcomes that we found from all these 10 countries. Not all are related to these 10 countries. There are just some common threads that we have identified through these 10 countries. And finally, the closure phase, it's more related to the continuity and sustainability, of course, of activity, but not only, it's also the employment of the staff after the end of the project. So to ensure that these positions will remain, these people will remain also after the end of a project. So here, moving on to the needs, there it was expressed the need of thematic concentration, which wasn't sufficient for some areas, like, for example, the employment of migrants. There was expressed the need of support support to smaller organizations to participate and access their funding, because usually they don't have the appropriate knowledge, so it's difficult for them to access their funding. Yeah. So also they feel they would need more support in relation to administrative workload. As I mentioned also earlier, this can be heavy for social services providers, and they need support into understanding also some aspects and try to cope with the administrative part of the projects. A clarity and a defined framework also. This also has to do a little bit about the legal framework, so procurement rules that I mentioned earlier, and also terminology. Appropriate deadlines, again, as mentioned before, period where it will allow them to kind of work on and prepare and cope with all the administrative workload. The co-funding, also again mentioned, and monitoring the use of funds and implementation, again KPIs, short-term funding for short-term impacts versus long-term issues. Again, here we saw that there is the need for long-term interventions rather than shorter term in the social service sector. Again, it was mentioned the communication, that it should be further developed, And in regards to partnership, there was expressed the need of portfolios of projects that could assist somehow in the creation of partnerships in an easier way to facilitate this process. Here, I will present you a little bit also some of the solutions and recommendations that we identified and we heard during this national forum. So it was actually mentioned the creation of an accessible, responsive, efficient, and interactive help desk, which made us feel happy that we try to contribute to that. So ensure continuity of funding. This is again more to sustain financially organizations that face risks sometimes through the use of funding for different reasons. To create national funding programs to provide co-funding and help and help them, assist them in maximizing the to assist them. Yep. Then again, it was mentioned to provide support and coaching by the ESF Plus agency, and creation of some useful tools as well, which it's very interesting because, again, as I said, some of this it's foreseen to be created also by the Helpdesk, our project. So it was also a good inspiration for us. So here it was mentioned about, again, project portfolio to assist in partnerships, checklist that helps with the eligibility of organizations in relation to applying for funding, and some other interesting ideas. And the public procurement review. It was also something underlined with more proportionate sanctions. And finally, a few more recommendations. Again, we see here about the appraisal criteria for subsidy applications to assist smaller organizations. So in general, there was the expression of and the understanding that small organizations were the ones mostly affected from the fact that they cannot access funding, and the ones that needed the support in doing so. It was also mentioned to create an appropriate NGO representative body that could assist also in the third sector to help them access and facilitate their access to funding. Support committees also, it was mentioned, for providing technical support, and in order to give them to create like a network of sharing experience among actors and stakeholders around interested for funding. Also digitalization of systems that they're already used that could allow automation, or also include like a feedback system in order to help them understand and learn from mistakes in a way faster. Standardization of management requirements, so like a common ground on how they work, so this will facilitate and make things run faster in a way. Again, timelines, as said before, they need to be revisited and replanned. It's a recommendation since, as said, we've seen that deadlines are a lot restricted sometimes, and again, both for managing authorities and social service providers. And again, we go back to indicators that complement the job creation indicators also mentioned. That's all. I try to be as brief as possible, but the information we received were very, very in-depth and interesting. So I tried to give you just a small overview of what we've collected so far. Thank you very much. And yeah, I give the floor back to you, Mattia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eleni. I mean, very interesting. As you said, this is already a summary of the quite dense inputs that we have received from, I mean, throughout these different events, but also in inputs provided through the surveys. Before moving on, I think it was worth mentioning that I mean, this work had been undertaken by UNIPSO with Margot. European Social Network had been clearly highly committed and engaged into this process, and also the European Aging Network. Now I suggest that we focus a bit more and while waiting still maybe for some questions from the different participants, that we focus more on what are the interesting initiatives that have been taken at the national level. I have one or two questions to our speakers, but in the meantime, I would like to invite actually participants to share their feedback about the different observations that had been made, the different inputs provided. Can you basically relate to what had been presented? And are you willing, I mean, maybe I think it would be possible to share with you the floor and if you can actually share your experience, whether it's echoing or not with what had been presented. I think that would be quite interesting to also to challenge the different observations that were made. Anyhow, I think my first remark would be that the good news is that the assumptions of this Helpdesk project were right. I mean, and that was confirmed also by the feedbacks provided by the different participants at the national level. There is a need to facilitate access to EU funds. And there is a need also to making sure that both managing authorities, intermediate bodies, and social service providers have somehow rooms to exchange or ways to also facilitate and better understand what's the reality of the counterpart. Margot, Eleni, you have mentioned some, I would say, general topics, some general issues. I would like to focus on three of them. The first one is this lack of connection between the different actors. You mentioned the lack of guidance, lack of communication, the mismatch between calls and the real needs for the actors, and also the small participation, sorry, of social services in call design or in operational program. Based on what you have observed and analyzed, whether through the survey or the national forum, could you say that this challenge is both shared by social services and managing authorities / intermediate bodies? That would be my first question. And also, if you can provide us possibly with some examples of initiatives taken on how to make sure or how to support that people are well trained for submitting a project proposal, but also for implementing these projects. I believe that was something that was also both shared by managing authorities and service providers, and I was wondering whether you can provide us with some examples on this topic. Who would like to start? Margot, perhaps Eleni, if that's okay with you.
I can start if that's okay. because in relation, for example, to the communication established between managing authorities and social service providers, which we've heard coming up more than once, we've also heard some good practices in relation to this, which was consultation periods after an opening call for proposals, that they were offering advice and guidance to beneficiaries every time they had an open call, which that was very nice, and of course social service providers would agree on that. But also sometimes during the implementation of a project, some type of info sessions, or when they were saying there were difficulties for something, again, they were open, they had an open channel of communication with beneficiaries. And I have to say also, we've realized, because the European Social Network was responsible for one of the national events in Sweden, for example, and there I can also highlight the work done by the ESF Plus, and in reality, the help that they offer to beneficiaries through also their website. They have created templates, they have created tools that can help them throughout, from the beginning to the closure of a project, for example, through templates, advice, also on procurement aspects, which we've seen it's difficult for beneficiaries to handle and cope with. So yeah, there are many good practices that can, I think, inspire us also in this project. Thank you.
Thank you,
Margot, if
Eleni.
want to...
Yeah.
Margot?
To complete, of course, I agree with what Eleni said, and I think some good practice come also from different countries. Some countries should take example of others. For example, I think that we can say that in Sweden, they have developed tools, and they have developed help on, as Eleni said, on websites. I don't know, maybe Yona can complete what she knows about it, but yeah, I think the good practices can come from the help between countries. Yeah.
Thank you, Margot. I was wondering whether the panelists maybe have some questions or requests for clarifications on the different aspects that have been presented by both Eleni and Margot. Would you like to take this opportunity to ask a few questions? I don't know who would like to start. Yona, would you like to possibly reflect on what both Eleni and Margot said?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. I'm from Sweden. That has been given as a good example here. But I think it was a very interesting presentation. I don't think I have the need for any clarification right now. But so I think I will leave it at that in preparation for my larger talk in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's
Thank you.
let's keep it for later. Maybe I have another question to both Eleni and Margot, and that relates more on the scope of the EU funds that we aim to cover in the Helpdesk project. My understanding is that most of the inputs that were provided relate to ESF Plus funds. I mean, based on the discussions, the inputs through the survey, I mean, could we possibly bring forward, highlight some more specific features depending on what kind of funds we are talking about? Or can we say that we received, I mean, some inputs on ERDF funds that could be interesting to to share. I don't know who would like to answer this question. Margot, would you like to say a few words?
Sorry. I said that I'm not sure about how to actually show the difference between like ESF Plus and ERDF. I mean, on our surveys, for example, we actually had general questions and with different options, and sometimes we didn't have that much details. So I'm not sure I can answer this, but maybe Eleni, if you...
I can come on this, just to say that also in the national events, most of the concentration was on ESF, previous programming period, and ESF Plus as well. Not so much, I mean, we've discussed a little bit also about ERDF, but this is a lot more on infrastructure. So most of the concentration in reality was on ESF Plus, which and also more on employment side of things and skills, etc. So that was the main concentration, and also it's one of the, I think, the main instruments that can assist with social services, and the one that needs, in reality, it's difficult administratively, and it's difficult to be explored in a way, if we want to put it this way, comparing to some other financial instruments that exist. It's difficult to navigate, so that's why also our focus was mainly on the ESF Plus for social services, and to how better kind of exploit it to support social services.
Thank you, Eleni. We also have a question from one of the participants that relates to the confidentiality issue. My understanding, and based on the information that I have, is that are there any sometimes, I don't know, regarding the issues between how would you actually take into account, I mean, some of the information that relates to the beneficiaries that need to be shared with the managing authorities, for example. Are there any issues that have been of this sort that have been highlighted, I mean, whether through the survey or in the different discussions held at the national level? I don't know who would like to come in on this, Eleni or Margot?
Can you maybe give a bit more details about the question?
So the question is more about in some EU-funded project, some of them are tackling or are actually focusing on some specific beneficiaries, and I'm, for example, thinking in the sector of homelessness. Some of these information need to be shared as part of the regular process with managing authorities. I'm just wondering whether this issue of confidentiality in sharing information about the ultimate beneficiaries of these projects had been highlighted in the different, whether surveys or discussions held at the national level.
Regarding the national events, if I understood well your question, there wasn't much of a mention about this, honestly. So I think we had some kind of a mention in one of the events about GDPR in relation to this, but not something that was generally mentioned throughout these events, throughout the national gathering events.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't notice many mention about this on the surveys, at least.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether there are still further questions from the participants. Otherwise, let me again thank you, both of you, for your presentation. I think we have now a clear view on what are the issues at stake when it comes to accessing and using EU funds for social services. I suggest that we now move on to our panel discussion. And so we have the pleasure to have three panelists representing the three main stakeholders engaged in the EU funding for social services. So for social service providers, we have Lourdes Marquez de la Calleja from Fundación ONCE in Spain. For a national managing authority, and she already had the pleasure to introduce herself, we have Jonna Karlström Borsum from the Swedish ESF Council. And we have from the European Commission, Marianne Doyen, Policy Officer on ESF Plus. Thank you to the three of you for being here with us. Based on the different findings that were presented and already a bit discussed, I think we should aim to have with this panel some further reflections and go maybe a bit a step further on ways of improving funding for qualitative social services in the EU. And I think that would be very interesting to have your feedback from your own perspective. And maybe to start with a first round of question, I would like to ask you if you can identify two or three key, or at least the most pressing issues that have been presented, and also possibly to, if you can say or tell us, according to you, where are the quick wins? What are the easiest issues to address, and that could possibly be addressed in the Helpdesk project? To answer this question, I will first ask maybe Lourdes to start with, and then I'll give the floor to the other speaker. Lourdes, you have 4 to 5 minutes to provide us your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much, Mathieu, and thank you to all of you, of course, UNIPSO, for organizing this webinar, and my colleagues that are with me in this panel. Well, I wanted first, Mathieu, to present a little bit our role, because as ONCE Foundation, because I think it's important to understand our approach as not only as social providers, but also as intermediate body in this ecosystem of the social of the European funds. So we are ONCE Foundation. We are from Spain, and we are part of the ONCE Social group, and we work to improve the quality of life of people with disabilities. ONCE Foundation, we are focused on the needs of people with disabilities. Well, we all together, we are more than 70,000 people, with 56% people with disabilities. So from different lines, we try to face the challenges and the needs of the people with disabilities. I think that it's very important to understand the context where we are, and the role so important that the social services have been playing all during the long history, but also especially these last years in the new context regarding the COVID, and regarding also the war, and how amazing have been the response from the social services sector. I think it's important to underline this issue, because it's important how the social services sector is ready to update to the evolution and the needs that in our case people with disabilities have to face. So yeah, and also I wanted to underline the context of this amazing stimulus package ever financed in Europe regarding the 2,000 billion euros that will help rebuild Europe after COVID, and how important is this chance for social services too. Regarding, you were talking the pressing issues, I think it's important what Eleni mentioned before regarding the access of the smallest entities to the funds. I think that is a challenge and a reflection that we have to go deeper and also to try to innovate a little bit, because of course it's not an easy challenge, but of course we have to think, I'm talking as an intermediate body in Spain, that we have been working through social funds for more than 20 years, and the impact of the social funds in the developing of our country has been amazing. So from our experience, we think that it's very important to address the fostering of the social sector. As much as the social sector or the disability sector in our case is well structured, the better to identify the needs, and also the better to cascade the funds. I'm talking as an intermediate body, but also in any case, I think that is important to the collaboration regarding the disability of the social sector. And also I think that is important the collaboration regarding the managing authorities, of course the public sector and the social sector, to participate not only in the access of the funds, but also in the design from the beginning of the process to the end, even regarding the impact that has been mentioned before. In all the process, the social sector should be involved to link the needs and the services and the solutions. And so we have also to underline in our case how important has been to take care of what we think that have been the main three levers to face the social inclusion of people with disabilities. In our case, accessibility is essential because it's the open door to develop and to enjoy all the rights of people with disabilities. If we don't have accessibility in any way, we don't have anything. Also, we think that training and employment are so crucial, because it has happened in other sectors too. We are talking, for example, regarding the inclusion of women. Until we have not been part of the social market, of the labor market, we are not taken in account in the same way. So I think that it's very important, the training and the employment as levers to get and to achieve the social inclusion. Once you have get all the, in a level, these challenges, then we can keep on working on the rest. Of course, innovation, of course, the rest that we have, because at the end, what we are trying to achieve all together in the disability sector, of course, is the Article 1 of the Convention, that is please let me just mention it, that is to stand the right and obligation to promote, protect, and ensure the full and equal enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms by all persons with disabilities. So to achieve this goal, I think that issues are important to address. And of course, the funding is essential.
Thank you. Thank you, Lourdes. I mean, very interesting, the different, let's say, prerequisites that you're setting up from the perspective, of course, on as social services, but Fondation say it's a bit more than that, and you recall that because it's also an intermediate body. Jona, would you like to take the floor and tell us a bit more what would you like to share with us in terms of the issues that you would like to highlight from your perspective and based on the different findings? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Firstly, I will say I agree with a lot of the challenges presented by the previous speaker, but I thought I would reflect on some of the challenges you presented, mostly those regarding knowledge and the challenges on using knowledge in the initiation and implementation stages. And since I work mainly with evaluation and analysis, my reflections, of course, will be given from that perspective. As a managing authority, we have also recognized these knowledge challenges, and in preparation of the ESF Plus, we set out to try to manage some of them. I would not say that we are completely there, but we have hopefully come closer to that goal. In the preparation of the implementation of ESF Plus, we started working on a strategy for learning. This since we have seen that lessons learned from, for example, evaluations didn't have the impact on calls that they could have. And this work was done by us in the analysis team, together with colleagues from our different regional offices. And we started by working on a theory of change for knowledge, mainly focusing on the managing authority itself. And this concluded that the effects that we wanted to reach was better quality and results of interventions that should be the result of organizational development within the managing authority, but also in project organizations and strategic recipients. And this should be done by working with different processes of learning. And those are influenced mainly by culture, activities, and giving learning time and priority for feeding those processes. We saw a number of different resources for learning. Those we already have and those we might have to develop. Some of these resources are different studies, evaluations, monitoring data, revisions, internal and external networks, and of course, the competence and experience from the people employed by the managing authority. And since we are still in the beginning of the implementation of ESF Plus, our main focus has now been on developing these processes. From my and my closest colleagues' point of view, we have worked a lot with how we can develop and better our calls from an evaluation standpoint. How do we make sure that our calls for actions are possible to evaluate and learn from? We have had several workshops with our regional colleagues who are the ones designing the calls to discuss how formulating both the problem, but specifically the aims of the call, are important to secure evaluability of the calls and the interventions. And this to hopefully secure the possibility of learning by being able to evaluate calls during the implementation of ESF Plus and using that knowledge to better the calls within the programming period. And as coordinators of evaluation, we also saw the need of an intermediate form of evaluation that aggregate knowledge within thematic areas or on specific calls that are within new areas that our managing authority has not been working with before. The results of program evaluation often come too late to influence the programming period that they are evaluating. Hence, we had developed this cluster or thematic form of evaluating the program's interventions while it's still ongoing. And the process for taking care of that knowledge and implementing it within the managing authority is something that we are constantly developing. But if I may say so myself, we have done some good progress in this during the recent years. And hopefully this work can also be part of helping with another challenge that was mentioned in your presentation, that of the mismatch between calls and real needs. We are, as we speak, in the process of finalizing a cluster evaluation of a call that was made in the beginning of the COVID pandemic. This evaluation focuses not only on the results of the projects within the call, but it also analyzes the social fund's ability to be a funding crisis and how we as a managing authority can work to be better prepared when crisis arises. So how can managing authorities use the fund with its limitations to be an actor in crisis? And we are looking forward to seeing the final results from this evaluation within a month or so. But having a strategy for learning and processes in place within the managing authorities on how to implement results from evaluations and other knowledge sources are important, not only in crisis, but for preventing that mismatch of calls and the real needs in society. I and my colleagues believe that working with creating more knowledge about our calls and our interventions gives us better opportunities to more efficiently use the social fund to meet the challenges in our societies. And this knowledge has to, of course, be created together with social service providers and other relevant actors. Since our aim for ESF Plus is to focus more on our evaluation resources on this intermediate form of evaluation, we hope that this will provide that arena. Since this cluster form of evaluation is done closer to the projects than a program evaluation has the possibility to do, we see this as an opportunity for social service providers and other project owners to be part of creating knowledge that will continue to develop the implementation of ESF Plus, but also feed into the design of coming programming periods. And this then could be part of a solution of another problem you presented. The low level of participation of social service providers in design of the operational program and call designs. It might not create possibility to a direct participation, but hopefully the knowledge gathered from these evaluations present the opportunity for the social service provider's perspective to be heard and used. I think I will stop there for now.
Thank you.
So I got a question while I was talking.
Yeah. Would you like to answer it and maybe elaborate more on the?
Yeah. Of course, yes. We have developed this cluster evaluation during the past programming period, and we are continuing to develop it now. And when we started last programming period, it was something we did that was focused on developing calls or evaluating calls. So you evaluate the aims and of the call instead of evaluating each project on their own. So you evaluate on a more aggregate level, on a call level. And what we are doing now in this programming period is working with it as a more of a strategic tool. So now we also look at thematic evaluation that are maybe not focused on a specific call, but more on projects within a thematical area. And then we sort of aggregate the results from these projects and look at it and evaluate it on a more aggregate level to get knowledge that are maybe not, because project evaluation are very useful for the project and that's sort of well, those involved in the project, but usually the knowledge created in project evaluation might not be able to give knowledge that is useful on managing authority level or governmental level. So what we are trying to do with this cluster and thematic evaluation is creating knowledge that is useful in a broader scope. I hope that was a clarification.
That was indeed quite impressive. Huh? The way you actually managed to base based on your evaluation process and so on, how you were able to possibly address the main challenges that we have discussed. Now I will leave the floor to Marianne Doyen from the European Commission. There was some observations shared, but also some practices and experience also shared from the other panelists. From your perspective, being the European Commission, where are the ways, the opportunities of improvement, and what would you like to retain or highlight as part of the main issues that were discussed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marianne. I've been working here at DG Employment for almost 6 years, working on the European Social Fund. And actually, previously, I also worked at ESN a long time ago. So I'm also quite familiar with these kind of issues. And they are also very dear to my heart. I'd like to reflect also on what people said earlier today and try to give you some food for thought and also tell you my perspective as coming from the inside. And I have to say, it's very encouraging to see all of these good practices, because I think the solutions can really come from you. And we, as the Commission, have also the role and the responsibility and possibly, hopefully, the power to share those practices and to make them known and to help disseminate them to other countries and other areas. So that's how I would see our cooperation and our added value, each of us. I'm not seeing really any easy issue to address, but I would say that for me, what comes out of everything today is the communication between the national and the local level and the Commission. And I think this project has been really successful in organizing this. And maybe here I can just give you a brief overview of the context in which we created this. I know you're familiar with that, but from our point of view, basically, we started talking and hearing a lot from social services back in the COVID times, and there were these webinars and these exchanges, and then this led to this project. And this project is quite unique because I'm not aware of any similar project here at DG Employment. We pulled some funding from the European Social Fund to build this work and to fund this huge consortium of partners. And this is not something that is very, very common. Organizations receive functioning grants, etc. But this overall umbrella project over 2 years is quite a one of a kind. And I think this has been very inspiring, and this should really inform the future steps as well. And we're definitely going to learn lessons from that. So this kind of partnership is really, really unique, and it's really special. And when meeting also the project coordinators, we could really see that you are helping to cover some of the blind spots that we have. And here I have to remind everybody of the fact that we work under shared management, meaning that the Commission gives broad guidelines and the managing authorities are responsible for quite a wide range of issues. And as Jonna very clearly explained, these issues are really really broad and really important. So we have to also build this trust with the managing authorities. But as the Commission, sometimes we're a bit, it's not a very comfortable position, because we need to build this trust and we need to empower the managing authorities while being also accountable for the final beneficiaries and the participants. So we are also working on this very fine line at all times, really. So the good practices that Jonna mentioned and that Lourdes as well, this is the kind that we try to share at EU level. And this is the thing that we bring to other member states. Something I was thinking is on evaluation, because it was quite an interesting topic. We have an evaluation unit down the corridor, actually. And I think maybe for our next step, it could be good to put you in touch with these kind of persons, because I think it might be good to hear from them about how they approach evaluation of the ESF at an EU level. And so coming back to the issues and to some of the feedback that I would have to give on what was presented this morning, I would say that I was particularly interested in the fact that you have both covered national and EU level, national with country fishes, with national fora, national events, and this has been really useful. And as you know, here at the Commission, at DG Employment especially, we work also with geographical units. So we also have country teams, and I think some of them have been able to attend the events that you've organized, and I hope this was useful. And I think this is one of the good good examples of partnership that has been created. So also bearing this in mind, this has informed also our work at national level with the managing authorities. And I've received also some feedback from colleagues from the geographical desks that were really interested in this, and also from our policy units. So the work that you're doing is definitely being discussed and is being found interesting by our colleagues. So yeah, keep going. So coming to the EU level, I was really interested to hear the EU trends that you have identified and the cross-cutting issues that were found. This is also very useful for us. You've identified trends that were common to two-thirds of the countries. So this was also very interesting. What I would like to hear more about, I think maybe for the future, some food for thought, would be perhaps how aligned the concerns of the social service providers and social services planners, how common are they with the ones of the managing authorities? Did they find common ground to talk to each other? And also how it would develop on the ground in terms of actual progress. I know it's ambitious, but I think this is also maybe something that we will look out for the second year of the project. How this develops on the ground, how this exploratory phase and contact building develops into changes in the funds and in the implementation of the funds. That would be most interesting to see. And one smaller aspect, but not the least interesting of aspects, was the importance of the groups that are a bit less targeted, usually, that we talk about a bit less. We focus on people in a situation of unemployment, but people with more difficult conditions or combined conditions, such as dealing with addictions, people with disabilities, most vulnerable migrants. It is very good to put a spotlight on this, especially in the context of the ESF Plus that has to focus and to spend 25% in social inclusion. So those groups that are most vulnerable, and I think that you are working with and for, this is also a focus that I found particularly interesting and that would be good to develop, because this is also something that we don't necessarily have the best view on. And I had some more thoughts, but maybe it's better for later when we discuss the next steps.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you all for your first feedbacks, and again, quite impressive also the different issues and initiatives that are taken at the national level. So indeed, I mean, I think we all have a clear idea on what are the issues at stake now, and what are the initiatives that are taken on the ground. Clearly, there's a big issue, and that is, I would say, a cross-cutting issue in terms of how do you make sure that first there's a good communication at the national level. How do you make sure that you can disseminate the so-called good practices or different initiatives, interesting initiatives that could that could be tested in other national context. Indeed, if we want to go a bit further than this, maybe I will start with you, Lourdes. I also know that you will have to leave us right after your final intervention. So let me already thank you for your participation. As part of the different, I would say, prerequisites in better accessing EU funds, you mentioned the importance of having a bottom-up approach in elaborating programs. Basically, making sure that well, the needs, and we talked quite a lot about this, the needs of social services, the needs that are on the ground are well taken into account when discussing, when exchanging with the different managing authorities. You clearly have a specific point of view on this because you also an intermediate body. But perhaps can you, I think it would be interesting if you now take your hat off a social service provider, and if you, based on your experience, can provide maybe some advice to other managing authorities on how to better integrate, how to better take into account these needs in elaborating program, in trying to, again, also exchange and better understanding the reality of the different actors that are dealing with the delivery of funds. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mathieu. Well, I think it's important, of course, collaboration, also with other organizations, because of course we don't know everything, and also we don't know what is going to happen in the future. But in our case, it's very important to try at least to predict the future, to be prepared for the future. I'm talking, for example, in our case, disability is a concept that is always in evolution, because it depends on two variables, mainly on the person, the impairment of the person, but also not only in that sense, also the consequence of the impact of the person with other society barriers. When these two variables impact, we have a situation of disability. So we have to face in these two senses, regarding the person and the characteristics of the person, and we have to try to anticipate, to know how the scientific development, how the socio-demographic development is going to impact in the person, but also how the society is developing, taking into account the new trends. Also, as also the European Union gives always us a lot of clues, and regarding the priorities of the European Union. We have the digitalization, we have climate change, we have new targets, youth, people, women, elderly. So we have a lot of clues that we have to take into account, and because if not, and mainly this time where you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow, we have to be prepared, because just to plan, because it's not easy one day to, okay, I'm gonna manage European funds. No, that's not the issue. Or I want to access to these funds because I want to resolve this problem. So we have to have very clear what are the needs that we want to focus. And also it's important to collaborate, of course, with the public administration, but also with other entities of your sector, in our case, the disability sector, the Spanish platform for people with disabilities, but also at European level, the European Disability Forum, but also with other collectives, women, youth, and also with other actors that are also going to be very helpful in order to find innovative solutions. Because maybe if not, we are going to be very focused, and we have to be in this context, and we have to be prepared to be flexible. And also we think that it's very important to take into account the context of each country. The context, not only because of the situation or the economic situation, also because of the culture. Because we are used, for example, at the Spanish level to co-finance is part of our way of working, but maybe in other country they are not used to co-finance, or they are not used to or they prefer that one entity manage, and they want to be very focused on operative issues. So or they don't want to debt, because in their culture they are not used to do that. So I think that the context of each country is very important. The context and the step that they are regarding managing European funds.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. Thank you again for being with us today.
Thank you, Matthew.
I would like to move on with Yona. So we already said about how important it is to have a good, how important it is to share well the knowledge, also to build the capacity within the organizations. I mean, what would be your pieces of advice to social services in actually addressing or improving their capacity to access EU funds? And I would like maybe to have a focus on the small entities or the newcomers that would like to decide to really grasp the potential of EU funding, because otherwise I fear that there's a risk of always funding the usual suspect. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with you, and this is something I think we discuss somewhat within our managing authority, because we see that often we have the same applicants. Those who already know the fund are the ones who are applying. But how do we get new project owners? How do we get the EU funds known? Because I would say, at least in Sweden, the funds are not that known. Those who know us, but not the other ones. When I get asked what I work with and I tell them where I work, I always have to explain what we do, because most people just don't know. But I think the strategy for learning and the processes of it that I discussed earlier, I think if we succeed in those, hopefully we can give calls that are better aimed at the needs of society. I think that is one step as a managing authority, that we have to have calls that actually match the needs in society. And then we have to use our tools as communications, we have to use networking, so we can make sure that the social fund is relevant for even more social service providers and for those more smaller entities of social service providers. So that's sort of our job. But I think one of the issues that is also mentioned in the presentation is something we discuss a lot about is the financial side of it, that it is difficult for small entities to be applicants, because you have a lot of overhead costs, there is a lot of administration. And my advice would be, I think, to network, to create bigger entities of a lot of small entities, to have that some sort of in organization that you create together that could do the administration part, so you can unify your smaller entities to get some sort of where you can help each other. So not every small entity has to have the administration and work with all that, those sort of things. And also I would think, and this is something we've discussed, my unit is both analysis and communication. And we have discussed a lot about how do we see the fund? Do we see the fund as something that is added value, or is it something that you have to sort of to be able to have to apply for funds, you have to have co-financing. But do you see the co-financing as a burden, or do you see the EU fund as something you can add on to a project you already would want to do, but you really can't afford with the funding you have? Do you then see the EU funds as an added value, or do you see the co-financing as a burden? And I think we have to change the perspective, because I think in Sweden you see the co-financing as a burden, and I think we have to change the perspective to see the EU fund as actually an added value.
Thank you, Jonna. Thank you. I mean, very interesting. These are insightful and recommendations. Now moving on to the European Commission and Marianne. It's pretty clear, huh? The feedbacks provided by the different national stakeholders. I'm wondering how the Commission can possibly further support. I mean, we already talked about the connection between managing authorities, intermediate bodies, and service providers, but also now in the context of the European Year of Skills, how can the Commission can further support the capacity building or professionalization that is well needed in social services? And maybe a subsidiary question is how, again, make sure that while elaborating operational programs, we can make sure that we take well into account the needs that are expressed, observed on the ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Mathieu. No, I think from what we've heard, the main challenges are indeed related to the programming, the implementation, defining the criteria, also securing EU funds for the EU and national priorities. And yeah, we know that EU rules carry a certain amount of burden, that's for sure. But we're working on that. Is also in the context of the post-2027, seems far away, but we're also already working on that. And maybe something I would like to mention is that this burden at EU level is often, sometimes, complemented by the additional burden by the member states. So this is also something that we're trying to identify and to avoid, that this EU burden is complemented by additional unnecessary burden that doesn't come from us at the national level, which we call the gold plating. That's for us quite a major issue to solve as well. As I said earlier, communication between stakeholders, that's really important. And this leads me to highlighting maybe some of the initiatives that we have that can well complement and enhance what you're doing in the help desk. So, and to facilitate the connections and to enhance capacity building. So the first thing I'm thinking about is the ESF Social Innovation Plus initiative. And what I'm mentioning now is on our website, so I can send the links, but I'm sure you will find them very easily on your own. And as part of this initiative on social innovation, we have communities of practice. So it's called social innovation, but it's actually also looking at thematic areas. And one is social inclusion. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, and some of you participated in previous activities and maybe also current activities. So they are for now built on thematic issues, social inclusion, employment and skills, but also around around policy issues, but also around practical aspects. And what we would like to do now that we've done the first exploratory events, what is going on with child poverty, what's going on with independent living, etc. We would like to move to practical aspects, such as how to draft calls. And here I'm very much echoing again what Jonas said, how to set the selection criteria, how to select quality projects involving stakeholders in an advantageous way. We would like also to try to find those practices in the EU member states. Maybe if in some member states it has been done, that you involve stakeholders and it actually gives additional points or an additional value to your projects, and maybe you're selected based on how meaningfully you've involved stakeholders. That could be an idea. So we hope that by creating this fora for exchange, we can have those practices a bit more in the highlight. here we're focusing really on managing authorities for those communities of practice with the stakeholders, of course, but we would really like to target the people who write the calls and who are in the driving seat, because we want to get out of this this duality between people asking for funding and people doing the funding, but not looking at what is actually needed. So we want to empower the managing authorities and to really involve them and ask them to do it and to abide by their obligation to involve partners meaningfully, and also to echo your issues as social service providers. So this is really the message that we're passing. So this help desk is very complementary to this. But in order to also enhance capacity, I would like also to tell you that we're working on identifying such support structures as the one that was mentioned in Sweden. In Italy, they have this huge support center that helps managing authorities and intermediate bodies to draft the calls, to understand the burden, to take away the burden from smaller beneficiaries, and to just take it at the national level. It's called the Tecnostruttura. I'm not completely familiar with this specifically because I'm not working on Italy, but I think this is one of the examples that is really good. And I think Sweden also had this centralized support center. At EU level, we're also launching what we call an ESF Plus support center. It will be dealt with by a contractor, but the idea is that managing authorities can go to this support center and ask for support in implementing something, getting good practices. How do I do this? How do I implement this? How do I involve partners? I want to draft a call on this topic. Can you help? This is meant to be this. So just to say that we're also trying to really enhance this capacity building. Just also to really be clear, capacity building has always been able to be funded by the European Social Fund. There is technical assistance, and managing authorities know that very well. And the type of support that you were mentioning, Mathieu, about upskilling people that draft the calls, this is eligible for sure. And this, we hope also to see the results very soon of the dedicated funding we're foreseen. If you remember, in the ESF Plus new regulation, we have introduced the necessity for every managing authority to allocate an appropriate amount for capacity building of social partners and civil society organizations. And those two categories are reported on separately. So we will be able to know how much is actually spent on the capacity building of civil society organizations. And when we say capacity building, it's not just about their daily functioning, it's really their capacity to interact and to address EU funds issue. And so far, I have the number here. There is actually 16 member states that have programmed support for capacity building of civil society organizations for an amount that is quite impressive, actually. It's almost 0.5% of the whole ESF Plus, which is really significant, actually. We were not expecting that it would be so much. And so that's 550 million euros in total right now, EU contributions and national together. So that's actually a really good sign that managing authorities, I think, are seizing this opportunity to fund the capacity building of organizations. And I would also echo maybe Jona's idea. I'm sorry, I'm so inspired by what you said. I keep quoting you. But the fact that, of course, smaller entities with the same preoccupations, with the same activities might come together to pool resources and to be a bit stronger on the EU scene. Here again, the contribution of the national authority is paramount. They are the ones who can facilitate this kind of partnerships, of course. But I think this is all nicely coming together, I would say, based on what I've heard today. So hopefully with this, we can move forward. And one last thing that we also have put in place is the social innovation match. We call it social innovation match. It's also a database, if you like. It's also on our website. And this is a website of socially innovative practices, more or less innovative, more or less new, but it has the really good some really good features in the sense that you can submit practices as project holder, project partner, and you can also get in touch and create new partnerships with people who have submitted a practice. So we hope that it would be quite a dynamic way of sharing practices and of also creating new partnerships with people with some similar interests. So this is also something that we've put in place recently and that you don't have results yet on, but yeah, promising practice, I would say.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Marianne. Very encouraging initiatives are being taken, and the Helpdesk is participating in this, I believe, good dynamic. Still, there are still rooms for improvement, and we'll keep working on this. One of them, and you just mentioned, is the different initiatives that are being taken at the European level. And in that regard, I think that the Helpdesk can be the right platform to actually share this kind of information. So clearly, I think we would be interested to make sure that everything that you mentioned is well referenced on our Helpdesk website, and making sure that all the national stakeholders are well informed. I'm looking at the time, and also the different questions that are not so numerous. Just to mention that indeed, as part of the issue that had been highlighted in the survey, but also at the national level, is the delay that is quite long. Marianne mentioned this gold plating. There's also some burden related to the European Commission procedures. But clearly, this is a major issue that we all, I mean, I think in most of the countries we can observe. I won't be more long than this. Let me first thank you all the panelists. That was a very interesting discussion, very insightful. It was really, I mean, you were very good in providing your own perspective, and coming up with some recommendations and pieces of advice to the participants. I will now give the floor to Laura Jones from the European Platform of Rehabilitation, who will have the pleasure to summarize and wrap up the quite dense discussions and exchange that just happened. Thank you, Laura. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mathieu, and thank you everybody for your contributions. Indeed, it was very rich discussions, and this won't be the first time that we will discuss these topics, of course, but I think it was really useful to bring everyone together. And I hope that also in recording the seminar, we can broaden the audience as well. But thank you for those of you for joining as well. And we're also interested to hear your feedback and your reflections after the meeting as well, because we want to make sure that this project is as relevant and as useful as possible. In that vein, it would be great to talk more about this ESF Plus Support Center, because I think we can definitely find some synergies there, and also make sure that we're not overlapping in terms of what we're achieving, but yes, really working together and finding mutual synergies in that, because we have the same aims. So I'm not going to spend too long in my summarizing remarks, but I had 3 key words that stood out to me from the discussions and the presentations, which spell ACE. ACE. We want to be a great project. We want to have great results. And I think there are 3 topics that we would like to highlight these initials. So one is really awareness of good practices that are out there. Sweden was a great good practice, and we hope that these good practices can also inspire other managing authorities. And we've been gathering different good practices within the Helpdesk project of project implementation, but also good practices in managing funds as well. So we want to spread awareness of what is already out there, of the possibilities of what can be done under the rules and for social services. And then I would go to say the next letter being collaboration. This is obviously essential for the funds to have the impact that they're supposed to have. We all need to work together. And this is really at all stages of the process, of course, and identifying needs being really key in that area of collaboration, that stakeholders need to be able to work with the funding authorities to identify where the real needs are and how those needs can be met through the EU funds. To identify priorities, topics, good practices. So collaboration is essential for a successful use of the funds, and it's also essential as the foundation for this project as well. We have great collaboration between many different actors and partners in the project, and also collaboration to ensure that these results are spread widely amongst our networks and amongst managing authorities and service providers. And then I pick up the topic of evaluation. We need to be learning from what has already been done. Also, the example from Sweden really highlighted this as well. We need to understand what can be improved, how we can work together better. Also, what could be done during the next funding period, because we want to make sure that our results just don't get lost, or that we find that they can't be implemented now because we're already far into the funding period. But we also want to see how we can feed into the next multi-annual financial framework and development of the next program. So we want to really highlight evaluation, learning from what's already been done and what we're discovering in the project, to be able to ensure the sustainability of our findings and, of course, continued success in implementing EU funds. So we look forward to working together with all of you, the Commission, managing authorities and our partners in the project. And hopefully you will keep engaged with us and we will keep learning together and developing great outputs for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for well summarizing this this 8th webinar then. Thank you again all to the speakers, also to the interpreters for their help and work in during this webinar. Just before closing, let to inform you that the recording of this webinar will be put on the Helpdesk website. Also, keep following the development of the website. It's not over yet. We still have a way to go and much work to do, especially at the national level, with some pilot training that will happen in some countries. There will be also a MOOC and so on. So we'll have further opportunities to inform you about this very important project. Thank you again. Thank you all, and I wish you a nice day. Bye-bye.